The Fly. A short story written by Katherine Mansfield, read for you in both Indonesian and English. Let's begin, and please enjoy. "You're very snug in here," piped old Mr. Wooderfield, and he peered out of the great green leather armchair by his friend, the boss's desk, as a baby peers out of its pram. "Tempatmu sangat nyaman di sini," kata Pak Wooderfield tua dengan suara melengking, dan dia mengintip keluar dari kursi besar berlapis kulit hijau di dekat meja sahabatnya, sang bos, seperti bayi yang mengintip dari kereta dorongnya. His talk was over. It was time for him to be off, but he did not want to go. Obrolannya sudah selesai. Waktunya dia pergi. Tapi dia tidak ingin pergi. Since he had retired, since his stroke, the wife, and the girls kept him boxed up in the house every day of the week except Tuesday. Sejak dia pensiun, sejak stroke, istri dan anak-anak perempuannya menahannya di rumah setiap hari dalam seminggu kecuali hari Selasa. On Tuesday he was dressed up and brushed and allowed to cut back to the city for the day. Pada hari Selasa, dia didandani dan disisir rapi dan diizinkan pergi ke kota untuk sehari. Though what he did there the wife and girls couldn't imagine. Meskipun apa yang dia lakukan di sana, istri dan anak-anak perempuannya tidak bisa membayangkannya. Made a nuisance of himself to his friends, they supposed. Mereka kira dia hanya merepotkan teman-temannya. Well, perhaps so. All the same, we cling to our last pleasures as the tree clings to its last leaves. Ya, mungkin begitu. Bagaimanapun, kita tetap berpegang pada kesenangan terakhir kita seperti pohon yang bertahan pada daun terakhirnya. So there sat old Wooderfield smoking a cigar and staring almost greedily at the boss, who rolled in his office chair, stout Rosie, 5 years older than he, and still going strong, still at the helm. Jadi di sana duduklah Pak Wooderfield tua, menghisap cerutu dan menatap bos hampir dengan rakus, yang berputar di kursi kantornya, gemuk, kemerahan, 5 tahun lebih tua darinya, tetapi masih kuat dan masih memimpin. It did one good to see him. Sungguh menyenangkan melihatnya. Wistfully, admiringly the old voice added, "It's snug in here, upon my word." Dengan nada rindu dan kagum, suara tua itu menambahkan, "Tempat ini sangat nyaman, sungguh." "Yes, it's comfortable enough," agreed the boss, and he flipped the Financial Times with a paper knife. "Ya, cukup nyaman. Setuju, bos," sambil membalik halaman Financial Times dengan pisau kertas. As a matter of fact, he was proud of his room. He liked to have it admired, especially by old Wooderfield. Sebenarnya, dia bangga dengan ruangannya. Dia suka ruangannya dipuji, terutama oleh Pak Wooderfield tua. It gave him a feeling of deep, solid satisfaction to be planted there, in the midst of it, in full view of that frail old figure in the muffler. Itu memberinya perasaan kepuasan mendalam dan kokoh karena bisa duduk di sana, di tengah-tengah ruangan itu, di hadapan sosok tua yang rapuh dengan syal di leher. "I've had it done up lately," he explained, as he had explained for the past, how many weeks? "Saya baru-baru ini memperbaruinya." Dia menjelaskan, seperti yang telah dia jelaskan selama, berapa minggu ya? "New carpet," and he pointed to the bright red carpet with a pattern of large white rings. "Karpet baru," katanya sambil menunjuk karpet merah cerah dengan pola cincin putih besar. "New furniture," and he nodded towards the massive bookcase and the table with legs like twisted treacle. "Perabotan baru," dia mengangguk ke arah rak buku besar dan meja dengan kaki seperti sirup pekat yang terpilin. "Electric heating." He waved almost exultantly towards the 5 transparent, pearly sausages glowing so softly in the tilted copper pan. "Pemanas listrik." Dia melambaikan tangan dengan hampir penuh kegembiraan ke arah 5 sosis transparan berwarna mutiara yang bersinar lembut di wajan tembaga miring. But he did not draw old Wooderfield's attention to the photograph over the table of a grave-looking boy in uniform standing in one of those spectral photographers' parks with photographers' storm clouds behind him. Tapi dia tidak menarik perhatian Pak Woodfield tua ke foto di atas meja. Seorang anak laki-laki berwajah serius dalam seragam berdiri di salah satu taman studio foto dengan latar awan badai buatan fotografer. It was not new. It had been there for over 6 years. Foto itu bukan baru. Sudah ada di sana selama lebih dari 6 tahun. There was something I wanted to tell you, said old Woodfield, and his eyes grew dim, remembering. Ada sesuatu yang ingin saya ceritakan, kata Pak Woodfield tua, dan matanya tampak redup saat mengingat. Now, what was it? I had it in my mind when I started out this morning. Apa ya? Tadi pagi sudah ada di pikiran saya saat saya berangkat. His hands began to tremble, and patches of red showed above his beard. Tangannya mulai gemetar, dan noda merah muncul di atas janggutnya. Poor old chap, he's on his last pins, thought the boss. Orang tua malang, dia sudah di ujung jalan. Pikir bos. And, feeling kindly, he winked at the old man and said jokingly, I tell you what, I've got a little drop of something here that'll do you good before you go out into the cold again. It's beautiful stuff. It wouldn't hurt a child. Dengan perasaan baik, dia mengedipkan mata pada orang tua itu dan berkata sambil bercanda, dengar ya, saya punya sedikit sesuatu di sini yang akan membuatmu merasa lebih baik sebelum keluar kedingin lagi. Barang bagus ini bahkan tidak akan membahayakan anak kecil sekalipun. He took a key off his watch chain, unlocked a cupboard below his desk, and drew forth a dark, squat bottle. Dia mengambil kunci dari rantai jamnya, membuka lemari di bawah mejanya, dan mengeluarkan botol gelap berbentuk pendek. That's the medicine, said he. Itu obatnya, katanya. And the man from whom I got it told me on the strict QT it came from the cellars at Windsor Castle. Dan orang yang memberikannya pada saya bilang secara rahasia bahwa ini berasal dari gudang bawah tanah di Kastil Windsor. Old Woodfield's mouth fell open at the sight. He couldn't have looked more surprised if the boss had produced a rabbit. Mulut Pak Woodfield terbuka lebar saat melihat itu. Dia tidak akan lebih terkejut lagi bahkan jika bos mengeluarkan kelinci. It's whiskey, ain't it? He piped feebly. Ini whiskey, kan? Tanyanya dengan lemah. The boss turned the bottle and lovingly showed him the label. Whiskey it was. Bos memutar botol itu dan dengan penuh kasih memperlihatkan labelnya. Benar, ITU whiskey. Chuno, said he, peering up at the boss wonderingly. They won't let me touch it at home. Tahukah kamu? Katanya sambil menatap bos dengan heran. Mereka tidak mengizinkan saya menyentuhnya di rumah. And he looked as though he was going to cry. Dan dia tampak seolah-olah akan menangis. Ah, that's where we know a bit more than the ladies, cried the boss, swooping across for 2 tumblers that stood on the table with the water bottle and pouring a generous finger into each. Nah, itulah yang membuat kita lebih tahu daripada para wanita, seru bos, sambil meraih 2 gelas yang ada di meja bersama botol air dan menuangkan secukupnya ke masing-masing gelas. Drink it down. It'll do you good. And don't put any water with it. It's sacrilege to tamper with stuff like this. Habiskan. Ini akan membuatmu merasa lebih baik. Dan jangan campur dengan air. Itu penghinaan untuk barang sebagus ini. He pulled out his handkerchief, hastily wiped his mustaches, and cocked an eye at old Woodfield, who was rolling his in his chaps. Dia meneguk minumannya, mengeluarkan sapu tangan, buru-buru mengusap kumisnya, dan melirik ke arah Pak Woodfield tua yang memutar gelasnya di bibirnya. The old man swallowed, was silent a moment, and then said faintly, It's nutty. Orang tua itu menelan minumannya, terdiam sejenak, lalu berkata dengan suara lemah, rasanya seperti kacang. But it warmed him. It crept into his chill old brain, he remembered. Tapi itu menghangatkannya, perlahan menyusup ke otaknya yang dingin. Dia ingat. That was it, he said, heaving himself out of his chair. Itulah yang ingin saya katakan, katanya, sambil berusaha bangkit dari kursinya. I thought you'd like to know. The girls were in Belgium last week having a look at poor Reggie's grave, and they happened to come across your boys. Saya pikir Anda ingin tahu. Anak-anak perempuan saya berada di Belgia minggu lalu untuk melihat makam Regie yang malang, dan mereka kebetulan menemukan makam anakmu juga. They're quite near each other, it seems. Tampaknya mereka cukup berdekatan. Old Woodfield paused, but the boss made no reply. Only a quiver in his eyelids showed that he heard. Pak Woodfield tua terdiam, tetapi bos tidak menjawab. Hanya getaran di kelopak matanya yang menunjukkan bahwa dia mendengar. The girls were delighted with the way the place is kept, piped the old voice. Beautifully looked after. Couldn't be better if they were at home. You've not been across, have you? Anak-anak perempuan saya senang sekali dengan cara tempat itu dirawat, kata suara tua itu. Dirawat dengan sangat baik. Tidak mungkin lebih baik daripada kalau mereka di rumah. Kamu belum pernah ke sana, kan? No. For various reasons the boss had not been across. Tidak. Karena berbagai alasan, bos belum pernah ke sana. There's miles of it, quavered old Woodfield, and it's all as neat as a garden. Flowers growing on all the graves. Nice broad paths. It was plain from his voice how much he liked a nice broad path. Tempatnya sangat luas, kata Pak Woodfield gemetar, dan semuanya rapi seperti taman. Bunga tumbuh di semua makam. Jalannya lebar dan bagus. Dari nadanya jelas bahwa dia sangat menyukai jalan lebar yang bagus. The pause came again. Then the old man brightened wonderfully. Hening kembali sejenak. Lalu wajah orang tua itu tampak cerah sekali. Do you know what the hotel made the girls pay for a pot of jam? He piped. 10 francs. Robbery, I call it. It was a little pot, so Gertrude says, no bigger than a half-crown. And she hadn't taken more than a spoonful when they charged her 10 francs. Gertrude brought the pot away with her to teach Em a lesson. Quite right, too. It's trading on our feelings. They think because we're over there having a look around, we're ready to pay anything. That's what it is. And he turned towards the door. Tahukah kamu berapa yang hotel itu tagih kepada anak-anak saya untuk sebotol selai? Katanya. 10 franc. Itu perampokan? Menurut saya. Kata Gertrude. Botolnya kecil sekali, tidak lebih besar dari uang logam setengah kran. Dan dia baru mengambil 1 sendok ketika mereka mengenakan biaya 10 franc. Gertrude membawa botol itu pulang untuk memberi mereka pelajaran. Benar sekali, mereka memanfaatkan perasaan kita. Mereka pikir karena kita datang ke sana untuk melihat-lihat, kita akan membayar berapapun. Begitulah, dan dia berbalik menuju pintu. Quite right, cried the boss, though what was quite right he hadn't the least idea. He came round by his desk, followed the shuffling footsteps to the door, and saw the old fellow out. Woodfield was gone. Benar sekali. Seru bos, meskipun dia sama sekali tidak tahu apa yang dimaksud benar. Dia berjalan mengitari mejanya, mengikuti langkah-langkah terseret ke pintu, dan mengantar orang tua itu keluar. Woodfield telah pergi. For a long moment the boss stayed, staring at nothing, while the gray-haired office messenger, watching him, dodged in and out of his cubbyhole like a dog that expects to be taken for a run. Bos tetap berdiri sejenak, menatap kosong, sementara petugas kantor berambut abu-abu yang memperhatikannya keluar masuk dari ruang kecilnya seperti anjing yang berharap diajak jalan-jalan. Then, I'll see nobody for half an hour, Macy, said the boss. Understand? Nobody at all. Kemudian, saya tidak ingin bertemu siapapun selama setengah jam, Maci, kata bos. Mengerti? Tidak seorang pun. Very good, sir. Baked Pack. The door shut, the firm heavy steps recrossed the bright carpet, the fat body plumped down in the spring chair, and leaning forward, the boss covered his face with his hands. Pintu tertutup, langkah berat melintasi kembali karpet cerah, tubuh gemuk itu jatuh ke kursi pegas, dan sambil membungkuk, bos menutupi wajahnya dengan kedua tangan. He intended, he had arranged to weep. Dia ingin menangis, dia berniat, dia sudah merencanakan untuk menangis. It had been a terrible shock to him when old Woodfield sprang that remark upon him about the boy's grave. Itu adalah kejutan yang mengerikan bagi bos ketika Pak Woodfield tua tiba-tiba menyebutkan tentang makam putranya. It was exactly as though the earth had opened, and he had seen the boy lying there with Woodfield's girls staring down at him. Itu seperti bumi terbuka, dan dia melihat putranya terbaring di sana dengan anak-anak perempuan Woodfield menatapnya dari atas. For it was strange. Although over 6 years had passed away, the boss never thought of the boy except as lying unchanged, unblemished in his uniform, asleep forever. Itu sangat aneh. Meskipun sudah lebih dari 6 tahun berlalu, bos tidak pernah membayangkan putranya kecuali sebagai sosok yang terbaring tanpa berubah, tanpa cacat dalam seragamnya, tertidur selamanya. "My son," groaned the boss, but no tears came yet. "Anakku," rinta boss, tetapi air mata belum juga mengalir. In the past, in the first months, and even years after the boy's death, he had only to say those words to be overcome by such grief that nothing short of a violent fit of weeping could relieve him. Dulu, dalam bulan-bulan pertama dan bahkan bertahun-tahun setelah kematian putranya, dia hanya perlu mengucapkan kata-kata itu untuk dilanda kesedihan yang begitu mendalam hingga hanya tangisan hebat yang bisa meredakannya. Time, he had declared then, he had told everybody could make no difference. Waktu, katanya dulu kepada semua orang, tidak akan membuat perbedaan. Other men perhaps might recover, might live their loss down, but not he. Mungkin orang lain bisa pulih, bisa melanjutkan hidup meski kehilangan, tetapi tidak dengan dirinya. How was it possible? His boy was an only son. Bagaimana mungkin? Putranya adalah anak tunggal. Ever since his birth, the boss had worked at building up this business for him. It had no other meaning if it was not for the boy. Sejak kelahirannya, bos telah bekerja membangun bisnis ini untuknya. Bisnis ini tidak memiliki makna lain jika bukan untuk putranya. Life itself had come to have no other meaning. Hidup itu sendiri seolah tidak memiliki makna lain. How on earth could he have slaved, denied himself, kept going all those years without the promise forever before him of the boy's stepping into his shoes and carrying on where he left off? Bagaimana mungkin dia bekerja keras, menahan diri, dan terus bertahan selama bertahun-tahun tanpa janji bahwa putranya akan menggantikan posisinya dan melanjutkan di tempat dia berhenti? And that promise had been so near being fulfilled, dan janji itu hampir terpenuhi. The boy had been in the office learning the ropes for a year before the war. Putranya sudah bekerja di kantor dan belajar pekerjaan selama 1 tahun sebelum perang. Every morning they had started off together. They had come back by the same train. Setiap pagi mereka berangkat bersama, mereka pulang dengan kereta yang sama. And what congratulations he had received as the boy's father, dan betapa banyak ucapan selamat yang diterimanya sebagai ayah dari anak itu. No wonder he had taken to it marvelously. Tidak heran, dia sangat pandai dalam pekerjaannya. As to his popularity with the staff, every man jack of them down, to old Macy couldn't make enough of the boy. Soal popularitasnya di kalangan staff, setiap orang hingga Pak Maci tua sangat menyukainya. And he wasn't in the least spoiled. No, he was just his bright, natural self with the right word for everybody, with that boyish look and his habit of saying, "Simply splendid," dan dia sama sekali tidak manja. Tidak. Dia adalah dirinya sendiri yang ceria dan alami, dengan kata-kata yang tepat untuk semua orang, dengan tampilan kekanak-kanakan dan kebiasaannya mengatakan, luar biasa. But all that was over, and done with, as though it never had been. Namun semua itu sudah berlalu dan seolah-olah tidak pernah terjadi. The day had come when Macy had handed him the telegram that brought the whole place crashing about his head. Hari itu tiba ketika Maci menyerahkan telegram yang menghancurkan seluruh dunianya. Deeply regret to inform you. And he had left the office a broken man, with his life in ruins. Dengan sangat menyesal kami memberitahukan Anda. Dan dia meninggalkan kantor sebagai pria yang hancur dengan hidupnya berantakan. 6 years ago, 6 years. How quickly time passed. It might have happened yesterday. 6 tahun yang lalu, 6 tahun. Betapa cepat waktu berlalu, seolah-olah itu terjadi kemarin. The boss took his hands from his face. He was puzzled. Bos melepaskan tangannya dari wajahnya. Dia bingung. Something seemed to be wrong with him. He wasn't feeling as he wanted to feel. Sepertinya ada yang salah dengannya. Dia tidak merasakan apa yang ingin dia rasakan. He decided to get up and have a look at the boy's photograph. Dia memutuskan untuk bangkit dan melihat foto putranya. But it wasn't a favorite photograph of his. The expression was unnatural. Tapi itu bukan foto favoritnya. Ekspresinya tidak alami. It was cold, even stern-looking. The boy had never looked like that. Itu tampak dingin, bahkan terlihat keras. Putranya tidak pernah terlihat seperti itu. At that moment, the boss noticed that a fly had fallen into his broad ink pot and was trying feebly but desperately to clamber out again. Pada saat itu, bos memperhatikan seekor lalat jatuh ke dalam botol tintanya yang lebar dan berusaha dengan lemah namun putus asa untuk memanjat keluar. Help, help, said those struggling legs. Tolong, tolong, kara kaki, yang berjuang itu. But the sides of the ink pot were wet and slippery. It fell back again and began to swim. Tetapi dinding botol tinta itu basah dan licin. Ia terjatuh lagi dan mulai berenang. The boss took up a pen, picked the fly out of the ink, and shook it onto a piece of blotting paper. Bos mengambil pena, mengangkat lalat itu dari tinta, dan mengibaskannya ke selembar kertas hisap. For a fraction of a second, it lay still on the dark patch that oozed round it. Sejenak, lalat itu berbaring diam di atas noda gelap yang merembes di sekelilingnya. Then the front legs waved, took hold, and pulling its small sodden body up, it began the immense task of cleaning the ink from its wings. Lalu kaki depannya melambai, berpegangan, dan menarik tubuhnya yang basah kuyup sambil mulai melakukan tugas besar membersihkan tinta dari sayapnya. Over and under, went a leg along a wing as the stone goes over and under the scythe. Atas dan bawah, kaki itu bergerak di sepanjang sayap seperti batu yang mengasah arit. Then there was a pause, while the fly, seeming to stand on the tips of its toes, tried to expand first one wing and then the other. Lalu ada jeda saat lalat itu tampak berdiri di ujung kakinya, mencoba melebarkan satu sayap, lalu sayap yang lainnya. It succeeded at last, and sitting down, it began like a minute cat to clean its face. Akhirnya ia berhasil, dan sambil duduk, ia mulai, seperti kucing kecil, membersihkan wajahnya. Now one could imagine that the little front legs rubbed against each other lightly, joyfully. Sekarang bisa dibayangkan bahwa kaki depannya saling menggosok dengan ringan, penuh sukacita. The horrible danger was over. It had escaped. It was ready for life again. Bahaya mengerikan itu telah berlalu. Ia selamat. Ia siap untuk hidup kembali. But just then the boss had an idea. Tapi saat itu bos mendapat ide. He plunged his pen back into the ink, leaned his thick wrist on the blotting paper, and as the fly tried its wings down came a great heavy blot. Dia mencelupkan penanya kembali ke dalam tinta, mencondongkan pergelangan tangannya yang tebal di atas kertas hisap, dan saat lalat mencoba sayapnya, turunlah noda tinta yang besar dan berat. What would it make of that? What indeed? Apa yang akan terjadi? Memang apa yang bisa dilakukan? The little beggar seemed absolutely cowed, stunned, and afraid to move because of what would happen next. Lalat kecil itu tampak benar-benar terkejut, takut, dan enggan bergerak karena takut apa yang akan terjadi selanjutnya. But then, as if painfully, it dragged itself forward. Namun kemudian, seolah-olah dengan susah payah, ia menyeret dirinya ke depan. The front legs waved, caught hold, and more slowly this time, the task began from the beginning. Kaki depannya melambai, berpegangan, dan kali ini dengan lebih lambat, tugas itu dimulai dari awal lagi. He's a plucky little devil, thought the boss, and he felt a real admiration for the fly's courage. Dia benar-benar pemberani, pikir bos, dan dia merasa kagum dengan keberanian lalat itu. That was the way to tackle things. That was the right spirit. Itulah cara menghadapi sesuatu. Itulah semangat yang benar. Never say die. It was only a question of. Jangan pernah menyerah. Itu hanya masalah. But the fly had again finished its laborious task, and the boss had just time to refill his pen, to shake fair and square on the new clean body yet another dark drop. Tapi lalat itu telah menyelesaikan tugasnya yang melelahkan, dan bos baru saja mengisi ulang penanya untuk menjatuhkan setetes tinta gelap lagi pada tubuh yang baru saja dibersihkan. What about it this time? A painful moment of suspense followed. Apa yang akan terjadi kali ini? Sebuah momen ketegangan yang menyakitkan pun terjadi. But behold, the front legs were again waving. The boss felt a rush of relief. Namun lihatlah, kaki depan itu kembali melambai. Bos merasa lega. He leaned over the fly and said to it tenderly, "You artful little bee." Dia membungkuk mendekati lalat dan berkata lembut, "Kau makhluk kecil yang cerdik." And he actually had the brilliant notion of breathing on it to help the drying process. Dia bahkan memiliki ide cemerlang untuk meniup lalat itu agar lebih cepat kering. All the same, there was something timid and weak about its efforts now, and the boss decided that this time should be the last, as he dipped the pen into the ink pot. Namun tetap saja, ada sesuatu yang lemah dalam usahanya kali ini, dan bos memutuskan bahwa kali ini harus menjadi yang terakhir saat dia mencelupkan pena ke dalam tinta. It was. Itulah akhirnya. The last blot on the soaked blotting paper, and the draggled fly lay in it and did not stir. Noda terakhir pada kertas hisap yang basah, dan lalat itu tergeletak di dalamnya tanpa bergerak. The back legs were stuck to the body. The front legs were not to be seen. Kaki belakangnya menempel pada tubuh. Kaki depannya tak terlihat. "Come on," said the boss. "Look sharp," and he stirred it with his pen. In vain. "Ayo, kata boss. Gerak cepat." Dan dia menggerakkan pena untuk mengusik lalat itu, sia-sia. Nothing happened or was likely to happen. The fly was dead. Tidak ada yang terjadi atau kemungkinan terjadi. Lalat itu mati. The boss lifted the corpse on the end of the paper knife and flung it into the waste paper basket. Bos mengangkat bangkai lalat dengan ujung pisau kertas dan melemparkannya ke keranjang sampah. But such a grinding feeling of wretchedness seized him that he felt positively frightened. Namun perasaan nelangsa yang begitu kuat menyerangnya hingga dia merasa benar-benar ketakutan. He started forward and pressed the bell for Macy. Dia maju ke depan dan menekan bel memanggil Maci. "Bring me some fresh blotting paper," he said sternly, "and look sharp about it. Bawakan aku kertas hisap baru," katanya dengan tegas, "dan cepat." And while the old dog padded away, he fell to wondering what it was he had been thinking about before. Dan sementara pria tua itu berjalan pergi, bos mulai bertanya-tanya apa yang tadi sedang ia pikirkan. What was it? It was. Apa itu? Itu. He took out his handkerchief and passed it inside his collar. Dia mengeluarkan sapu tangannya dan mengusap bagian dalam kerahnya. For the life of him, he could not remember. Dia benar-benar tidak bisa mengingatnya. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe for more opportunities to listen to Indonesian. Check out our playlist section for many other languages you can listen to. Remember, getting lots of passive listening in your target language whilst you wash dishes, work out, or commute is a very easy way to skyrocket your language progress. Try it out for yourself. We hope we will spend more time with you again soon, enjoying languages and great stories together.